Well, hello everyone. I am John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And tonight, Wednesday night, a new Wednesday night trio featuring two people that I've had the pleasure of interviewing many times here on McDuff Lives. David Cranmer, Underdown, and Bill Taylor. Gentlemen, thank you for being here, and good evening. How are you?
I'm doing good.
I'm good. Thanks, John.
All right. Well, I can tell you're both eager to get into the content and the subject matter, and so am I. I want to just let everybody know where I'm coming from tonight. I've been, I've discovered a economist named Michael Hudson maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and have been enjoying from time to time reading some of his articles. And I ran across a video interview of him by a gentleman from India who is a very good economist, if I can say so, somebody that can really dig into the issues. And I'll show you the YouTube channel in just a moment. But he's interviewing Michael Hudson, and Michael Hudson is now 83 years of age, and he's been studying this stuff a long, long time. And he unfolds in a way that I think is really, really helpful how it could possibly be that the United States is the world's greatest empire at the same time that it has become the world's greatest debtor. And it seems like some kind of a crazy miracle that we're in this position. And from World War II to now, he's going to give us a little explication of how this happened, which I had never really put together, and I don't know if my two guests are going to agree with what he has to say, because both of you have relevant experience, and you've been looking at this stuff with us for a couple of years now. But listen to what he has to say. Let me get him up on the screen. And once again, this is Michael Hudson, and his book is Super Imperialism. And he's now published the 3rd edition in 2021, and that is the subject of this interview, which I will, where is it? Oh, sorry. 1 second. See? There he is. Okay, now I'm going to start the interview at the point where the gentleman is just finishing asking the question. But I just set it up basically what the interviewer is asking him. Could you explain how it is that we went from the world's richest nation at the end of World War II to where we are now?
Well, that was what led me to publish Super Imperialism and what made it a bestseller in so many languages. I was a balance of payments analyst for Chase Manhattan Bank in the 1960s. And the balance of payments was something that was not taught in the universities, because if you have an economic theory that says the whole world works on barter, then there isn't any balance of payments deficit, it's all barter. But we could see that it wasn't. The United States, after World War II, the United States emerged in such a strong position that it had most of the world's gold. And from 1945 until 1950, the United States kept drawing in the gold from Europe and other countries. And by 1950, it had over 70% of the world's monetary gold supply. Well, all that began to change with the Korean War. Beginning in 1951, even late 50, the United States balance of payments moved into deficit. And the deficit accelerated during the Vietnam War. And you had a steady gold outflow. So all the money that the United States would be spending on military abroad would end up in the hands of foreign central banks. I did an analysis for Arthur Anderson after I left Chase Manhattan on what really caused the U.S. deficit by doing a statistical analysis. The entire U.S. balance of payment deficit throughout all of the 1950s, all of the 1960s, into the 70s was military spending abroad. The private sector was just exactly in balance. It was the military spending that was sending these dollars abroad. And because Vietnam and Southeast Asia had been French colonies, the banks there were mainly French. And so all the money, the dollars that the Americans were spending in Asia were turned over largely to France, to Paris, and General de Gaulle would cash them in once a month. Okay, here are the dollars, give us your gold. Germany actually cashed in even more gold than France in many months because it was getting dollars as a result of its industrial export surplus. So these dollars that were spent, the more America got involved militarily throughout the world, the less gold it had. And we used to sit every Friday, the Federal Reserve would publish the gold cover. In other words, here's the US currency, here's the gold stock, and the US currency by law had to be covered 25% by the gold reserves. But the currency was going up because of the Vietnam War inflation. The gold reserves are going down because of the military spending, and it was obvious that the United States was going to run out of gold, and gold was how it had restructured the international financial system after World War II. The American financial power that gave it the diplomatic power over other countries who all needed money was gold, and the belief was when President Nixon finally had to close the gold window, where there was no more leeway for gold to flow out without threatening gold convertibility, everybody thought, is America's imperialism going to be over? Is this going to usher a new world order, and will Europe and other countries running balance of payment surpluses end up in control? Well, I realized very quickly that that wouldn't happen at all, and that what actually enabled America to create a new kind of imperialism was precisely its going off gold. Because once it went off gold, all these dollars continued to go to the foreign central banks of European countries, of oil exporters, of third world countries exporting raw material. And what were these central banks going to do? Now that they couldn't buy gold, at that time, in the 1970s, central banks would only spend their money on buying the bonds of other governments. Well, no other government had as many bonds to issue as the United States, because the United States was running a budget deficit. So it was actually the worse the American balance of payments deficit grew. The more money it spent abroad militarily, the more money dollars ended up in foreign central banks that recycled them to the United States by buying treasury securities. So it was actually the balance of payments deficit that was financing the domestic budget deficit and locking into countries into having to support the United States dollar, and with it, the dollar's foreign spending on military basis all over the world, almost 800. And so it turns out that when foreign central banks adopted the treasury bill standard, the dollar standard, instead of the gold exchange standard, it was really the American military base standard. What they were funding with their international financial savings was America's military spending to surround them with military bases. And that was what led the Defense Department and the State Department to say that I've explained to them how a new form of imperialism worked that was much more efficient than the old European colonialism, especially because other countries didn't understand that it was financial. You didn't need to occupy a country. You just need to control its minds and how it thought about the economy to imagine that all of this subsidy of the America's free lunch internationally was all perfectly natural and reasonable.
All right, and I'm going to stop there. That's the meat of what I wanted to toss out on the discussion table tonight. In let me give credit to the channel here. It's called India and Global Left, IGL, and it's on YouTube. I don't know the gentleman's name, but once again, he's got a number of really cool interviews. So I do recommend that channel. Now let's get back to our panel here and see what we can make out of this. Well, I learned a lot. I mean, I guess the last thing that kind of resonates with me is when he said that you don't have to conquer them. You just have to control their minds so that they think that all of this is natural and normal and the way it's supposed to be. It reminds me of the cartoon of the king standing on the balcony looking at the crowd out there, and half of them have torches and the other half have pitchforks, and they're crowding up around the castle. And the advisor whispers over to the king. He says, "Sire, no, you don't have to fight them. You just have to convince the torch people that the pitchfork people are going to take away their torches." And that's what is the kind of the lighter, funnier side of it. But it is psychological manipulation that has just been allowed to happen over time in a way that, hey, we had all the money after World War II. Then we decided we had to get into some wars. And one question: why do we have to spend all that money in Korea? I don't understand it. But that we did. And then the next new thing was when we went into Vietnam. I didn't realize that the banks there that we were, where I guess we were spending the money to buy all of the stuff we needed, were French. And that's something I want to ask about. Is that connected to the French, the Schlumbergers and the Jean de Menis and the Texas, Louisiana French crowd? And I just see all kinds of possible, tentacles reaching here and there from the financial system. But the real bottom line is, I still don't understand how it came to be that we don't have any gold. We're printing money. We're $30 trillion in debt. And yet we're maintaining the most powerful military and gradually conquering the whole world through our limitless power. It looks like a kind of a machine that's been built to destroy the world in some way. It's creepy. It's amazing, and I can't understand it. So. Well, grab onto it anywhere you want to. Let's start with Bill Taylor.
I mean, I think I wouldn't have thought this a couple of years ago, but now I think all these deficits and this inflationary money printing and removing the gold standard, I think is probably all deliberate for the purpose of allowing a small cadre, cabal, elite accumulate actual assets like gold and natural resources, and leave everybody holding worthless paper money at some point. It's like, I think we spoke last time we spoke just 2 weeks ago. I said I was never against the idea of a Federal Reserve until only relatively recently, where there is the argument to be made that leaving a country on a gold standard does cause a deflationary or panics in the economy. You saw that in the 1800s because of a lack of liquidity, a lack of money flowing. But to that end, the Federal Reserve is certainly not acting in the best interest of the United States, in that it keeps printing way beyond its really duty to print more money to keep the economy running smooth. I mean, they know better. They know they can't print money all day, but they do it anyway. and I would say it's relatively, the past 20 years is really when it's become almost apparent that the Federal Reserve is trying to crash something or to create a situation which, well, you just take it to its natural end. And the situation it would create would be, the people holding devaluing dollars and the elite holding, um, capital appreciating hard assets like gold. It's all part of the grand plan, I would say.
All right, it's all part of the grand plan now, David, and the end game is everybody ends up with the worthless pieces of paper and carries wheelbarrows full of worthless money to go buy a loaf of bread for the family, and that sounds like yeah, those dastardly people, they would do that, but nevertheless, I'm not convinced. I'm still thinking that the theory is to just keep on going, that it's never going to stop. David.
Well, I'm with you on that. I mean, we the first time I ever spoke with you, I talked about how I tried very hard early in my school and learning about economic systems. It was system didn't seem sustainable and it didn't seem explainable. What they were doing and the purposes of it. My initial reactions to watching that video is, I do think it is a strategy of tension, using financial warfare. One of the things that happened with the going off the gold standard and the Nixon shock was that we went to what was called a petrodollar system. And the basic idea behind that was what he was explaining was that the Middle Eastern countries, they wanted to build up their military presence. And of course, the argument for that was it seemed like all the effort of our public relations and policy was to prevent communism, and that the threat of communism was so great that you needed to build up military bases, as you said, all over the world. I think about that Alan Dulles' focal point system, where he wants to have, a person in every, city or possible war zone around the world where they're, ready to react to any kind of a communist threat that could come in. But the petrodollar system basically was that instead of using gold as a reserve asset to back our currency, they use a system where the Saudis would clear their petroleum sales in U.S. dollars in exchange for buying military assets from the United States. So one of the things that I don't get from what he was explaining was how we went into so much debt as far as supplying military assets, because I always thought America was the world leader in military hardware. So that would seem like it would be an area where we would be trading our military assets in exchange for currency or for gold or whatever. So that's one thing that I'm a little bit fuzzy on. The other area that he talked about in before that in the video was how we, when the World Bank and the IMF were set up at Bretton Woods, which was in concert with the creation of the United Nations, that the people that they always put in charge of those banks were people with military backgrounds. Not always. The first IMF head was Eugene Mayer, who we've talked about. Bill's talked about Lazard and Eugene Mayer's history. He was a Federal Reserve chairman. He's thought of as sort of a newspaper man with the Washington Post, but his real background was Lazard, which is one of the French banks. And then it was John McCloy, who we've talked about a lot. He was the next IMF head. His background was, of course, in Germany. I mean, his history goes, back to the Versailles Treaty and sort of the same situation that Germany was faced with after World War I, and what to do with their reparations that they negotiated, and then later it gets into to McNamara. Robert McNamara is an IMF head after he's the Treasury Secretary. So what he said is true. There is a great tie into the people that have a military background, but also into sort of the same banks we've always talked about. Like, I know Bill loves to talk about his governor, Larry Murphy, who has a Goldman Sachs background. Bill Murphy, sorry. Larry Murphy was a hockey player for the Red Wings. Bill, Goldman's fascinating too, because their background, Sidney Weinberg, who was the head of Goldman Sachs, they also have very old ties with Sears Roebuck, which, is one of the old, what I think of as like one of the kind of the East India companies. They're selling different, kind of a merchant company, but they really got in early with the mail catalog, which was sort of a new way of selling goods through catalogs and not going to stores. But with Goldman, there's so many characters with Goldman Sachs to look at also, because they they did the IPO for Ford Motor. I mean, I always focus on the Detroit people, but it was Sidney Weinberg that actually advised Henry Ford II to make Robert McNamara the head of Ford Motor Company before Kennedy brought him on as the Secretary of Defense. So when we talk about these big military actions like Vietnam, I mean, McNamara has such a big role in that. And then, of course, his next landing spot is the World Bank. So there is a lot of connective tissue between what he's saying as far as banking and using, military, the threat of military takeover as far as the communist push just seems like something that was really, a big, really before my life. But I also look at what happened with Russia, who was the great rival, and then who was involved with, the shock therapies. A lot of people are talking about shock economics right now, because Jeffrey Sachs, he's sort of transitioned to this Lancet COVID commission, but his previous history was he was a Harvard economist that was doing shock therapy for Europe and then the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Well, Bill, are you still of the opinion, I guess, do I understand you correctly that you think that that it's all intended to crash, and at some point it is going to crash?
Yeah. I mean, I think at some point it crashes. It's how they can maintain their power. I mean, I'm a full-blown conspiracy theorist now.
Welcome to the club.
It's hard to who isn't. But I would, what's the saying? I think it was the saying. At the every family fortune starts with a crime or something like that. I don't have the quote exactly right.
The first money is always dirty, is the way a Russian friend explained it to me.
Behind every great fortune is a great crime. Is the other one,
right? But I still think that that lie has to be sustained for generations. I think, and I think that's what they're doing. So the initial fortunes made slave trading, the cotton trade, the textiles, a lot of opium, armaments. But it was done nefariously, and certainly, something like slavery is unethical or immoral on a bunch of different levels. But my main point is that once you create that initial wealth from a dirty source, you kind of get hooked into the whole idea that it's somehow maybe justifiable, or that nobody should be able to figure this out, that or else the jig is up. Essentially, it's like an organized crime family that lasts a few decades. Think of the New York crime families; they've been around probably since the 1930s, and some of them are still around, but they lived pretty happily up until from the 30s to the 1990s. That was successive generations of criminals buying front businesses that looked legitimate, but really they were selling heroin on the Lower East Side, is where their main money was coming from. I would say that that's what a lot of these wealthy families in the United States have been doing just as long as the Italian mafia in the city, but actually longer, probably since the Civil War, when you can play both sides of the trade. Just going through some of these names, I like the history parts of this, and just going through some of these names, you have to wonder, you see the pattern. How do these families maintain their wealth over so many generations when they really shouldn't? Especially these families in the Carolinas or in Louisiana or in the South, where the Union troops came through and burned down all their crops and set their workforce free and burned down the plantation in the meantime. And it would appear that a lot of these families seem to be the rulers of the realm still. I mean, I was looking at the Auchincloss family the past couple of days, and you find the Auchincloss there with Colonel Mandel House in Woodrow Wilson's administration back in 1920. Go back even further, you have the Mandel houses running blockade or sailing blockade runners through the Union naval forces in the Gulf of Mexico, from Galveston all the way to all the way to Mobile, Alabama. You make a lot of money doing that, but you're also, you probably owe somebody a favor as well, and ultimately you get to the Rothschilds and the mills that they own in the UK and in New England, and they really needed that cotton bad. So an Auchincloss family probably started out. I saw one reference to the original Auchincloss brothers who really started building the wealth in the 1830s, 1840s. That they were the blockade runners too, and that's seems to be where the Auchincloss and House became good buddies, because Gordon Auchincloss, he married House's daughter, and and you bring it up to the present, and who was Fauci talking to, or Fauci emailing back and forth about the bad publicity of the Wuhan lab? It's Hugh Auchincloss III. I don't think it's coincidental at all that Hugh Auchincloss III is conspiring with Anthony Fauci to cover up what had been done as far as the COVID pandemic was concerned. I mean, these are, I think, I can't think of the name now. He's on a Sheehan channel. He was a Watergate lawyer, I believe, but he calls them the rulers of the realm. And it's the same name every single time. The same names every single time. It's not a lot of names. Was it the name we saw the other day that George Webb tweeted out? Arnold. There's another. It was Arnold, and he's part of this True the Vote action. I didn't look too much into him, but I'm guessing he's the Arnold family of Benedict Arnold fame, and he's one of them too. They're always working behind the scenes.
Sounds like Arnold and Porter, the famous D.C. law firm.
Right.
Edward Mandel House, and I hadn't made the connection until last week, and I said, oh, Governor Mandel of Maryland, the one that went to jail for a little bit of mail fraud involving racetracks and horses and things. Maybe, who knows? But David Icke was banned from all the European countries within the past couple of days, and his son Gareth posts on Twitter, and he posted a video that Mr. Icke made standing on the British shore, looking across at Holland, which had instigated this EU ban because David Icke was telling the truth about what they're doing, the shutting down farms, shutting down small businesses, that the pandemic was really about putting all the small businesses out of business and shutting down our ability to be independent, making us all dependent upon the great totalitarian eye in the sky, or whatever you want to call it, big brother. And he said, that it's about bloodlines, and he's been saying that for a long time. We've mentioned many families in our studies as we've worked together over the years, and it seems to be that these New England families, like the Muellers and the Dulleses and well, you know who I mean, the Cabots and everybody else, are somehow part of the super bloodline people that include the royal families of Europe, the British royals, of course. But it's to try to look for an answer as to why the family wealth doesn't just peter out after the third or fourth generation, when finally there's a spendthrift in the family and he goes out and throws it all away. I mean, at some point you'd expect that to happen. But if you're part of the big skull and bones fraternity type, then you don't really have that option. You're going to need to just at least continue as a placeholder, even if you don't want to participate. And you can't leave. It's kind of like the Hotel California. You just can't. Once you're in, you can't leave. All right, David, your turn.
Well, with the auction clauses, I feel like you can't say them without talking about Jackie and the Jackie Kennedy. I mean, wasn't her father-in-law Hugh Auchincloss?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I feel like that. And they were a big Newport family. And when you talk about the Benedict Arnold, he was, of course, one of the founders of the Rhode Island colony, and he's somebody that's a fascinating character for me historically, because his grandson is so famous as being the traitor, to the point where his name is synonymous with being a traitor. But he also is related to Stephen Arnold Douglas. And of course, for me personally, my great grandma was a Douglas, and so I always wonder about her connection with that family. The Arnolds and the Douglases, because they were a big Newport family. But of course, they also had this. They had this Newport Tower, which was the Arnold burial grounds in Newport, where he lived as the governor, and it was purchased by the Turo family, and the Turos were married to Moses Michael Hay. So if we want to get into our Freemason stuff, Moses Michael Hay was the Grand Master of the Boston Freemasons, with guys like John Hancock and the what's his name, Paul Revere was his number two, and he started the Bank of Massachusetts, which was the second chartered bank in the United States, and he also was one of the founders of Mass General Hospital. But they bought this Toro side. They ended up buying the Arnold's burial ground. So I always wonder about that, because Judah Toro, who also started the Toro clinic in New Orleans, where Ochsner started before he had his Ochsner clinic, he partnered, or his estate, which he was supposed to be one of the wealthiest men in the United States, his estate was handled by a guy named Moses Montefiore, who was the brother-in-law of Nathan Mayer Rothschild, and he started the first almshouse in Israel in the 1850s. And so that is always an interesting background if you want to talk about Rothschild banking, because Moses Montefiore, his mother was a Moncada. And the Moncadas, John, we've talked about, the Moncadas are the Sephoric banking family that, had to flee in 1492 with the Alhambra decrees. But they're a force in banking. They're Warburgs, and Moses Montefiore's brother-in-law and business partner with Nathan Mayer Rothschild. So, I do wonder about that stuff because, you talk about, well, if you're in it, you're in it. But again, like for me, like, I mean, John posted something that I really was interested in was the Randolph family, because they were so tied with William and Mary, and he was the judge that oversaw the Aaron Burr trial, and of course the Key family was the lawyers in it and all this stuff. So that's why I struggle with it, because if the real story is, if you're a Freemason and you protect your brother before country and religion and all this stuff, then where are the Masons that protected the Keith family and the Arnold and the Douglas family? If they were in there, it seems like they're at least not to the level like that. But those are things I wonder too, because then you get into the Douglas Aviation, which was original Rand Corporation, was run through Douglas with Hap Arnold, who is also related to the same Benedict Arnold family.
I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of that.
Hap Arnold he's very proud of his Arnold military family. And then Donald Douglas, who started the aviation company, Douglas Aviation, he was very proud of his Douglas family. So now we're getting into the Jacobites and the Mary Queen of Scots and all this stuff with the Douglas family. I mean, that's where I think it goes. Which again, it's a lot of tinfoil hat, and but those are the things that I look at with those. I mean, I do think that the other thing with Colonel Mandel House, his dad, who was the blockade runner in Houston, and he also started like the Houston Plank Road Company with Rice, that started the Rice University, which is a really interesting story because he was murdered, and his lawyer was James Addison Baker, the great grandfather of James Baker. That's Baker Botts. So there's a lot of old scandals, and so like I said, with the Ocean Kloss, with Fauci, James Baker is right in the mix there too, because he was like, we talked about the gold shock in the 72. Well, that was John's dad's rival. That was one of the main architects of that was George P. Schultz. So I link Baker and Schultz as being these guys that were diplomats, but also bankers, and Bechtel, the Hudson. He spoke about the Korean and the Vietnamese War with the military spending. Bechtel Corporation was one of the major contractors for Vietnam, and then also doing pipelines and things all around the world. But also the Kellogg, Root and Brown, they're very tied to the Baker family in Texas, and they were George Brown and those guys. They were also super builders during Vietnam. So yeah, I'm in agreement that I do think there are the same families that seem to just repeat over and over again.
And these people that are connected, the bloodlines. And by the way, it's important to recognize that Freemasonry is not all monolithic, and there's different divisions within it, and all kinds of different divisions in it. And some of them are also Knights Templar, and some of them are the Southern jurisdiction, and some of them are the York Rite, and all of this means a lot in terms of which side are they on in the Civil War, for instance, or even going back in the American Revolution. There were Masons on both sides, and they were strongly held views on both sides. Nevertheless, this idea of being part of a secret society seems to be more important to these people than national sovereignty. It seems to me to be that at least in the 19th century, that these folks that were going to these secret meetings and deciding the local economic issues in their uh, lodges, they work together to achieve, but almost like a cartel, control and profit from whatever economy they're in. But some of them, adopted that Southern jurisdiction, Albert Pike thing that has, uh, seems to me, have no limits to what they will do. And this is where you bring in the dark side. And you speak often of the Purple Gang in Detroit, and we have often talk about mafia all over the place. The idea that there's two sides to life. There's the visible good side that everybody sees, and then there's the dark side that's hidden, but nevertheless still essential. And this idea of a Satanism that is being pushed so hard in our culture is a justification for this continued existence of Murder Incorporated, of assassination programs, of massive theft, of genocide, of you name it, of awful, dirty, disgusting, bad deeds that somehow we have to put up with. And what bothers me the most is that that is cooked into our system. That yes, money laundering is going to happen, and we are going to allow it happen. We don't have clean banks anymore. Our banks are all dirty. They all have been infected with this since Glass-Steagall was taken down. And so the dirty money is mixed in with the clean money. The bad guys profit, and the rest of us have to pay by inflation or taxation or whatever to make up the difference, because we're kind of the marks in the carnival. We're the carnival marks. And if this thing keeps on going, we're at a point now with it seems to me that this financial behemoth that's carrying this incredible load of debt has committed itself to taking down Russia. And it's committed itself to doing it through the war in Ukraine. And so after we've thrown billions and billions and billions of dollars at big pharma to deal with the pandemic, we're now throwing billions and billions and billions of dollars to a country that few Americans ever really think about, ever thought about before, the past 2 years. And now it seems like all of Europe is at stake. And if we don't win this one, the Ruskies are going to take over. They're going to be marching into Paris and blowing up London, and all of our good old buddies in Europe are going to be communist, and we're all going to, this farce that we're maintaining for this to keep fighting this war. The reason behind it is that it's an unstoppable juggernaut. If we stop it, it's like musical chairs. The music stops. There's not enough chairs for everybody, and chaos ensues. Um, is there a way to get out of this? What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are waking up to the fact that this is the way the world it runs and how it's been running for a long time. People who don't have any interest really in any history, they're asking questions that and I think that's why I think progress has been made, which is why you see the crackdown on social media the past couple of years. I think that they really I think that the darker forces really took a hit when people started really looking into some of this stuff. I mean, it took me 48 years to become a conspiracy theorist. And I had an interest in politics before, and I was pretty convinced that the Clintons were part of something, but not necessarily part of a grander plan. But yeah, I mean, there does seem to be sort of an awakening. I don't think it takes that many people to figure out. If we went from 0.5% of the population would be considered conspiracy theorists in 2015 or 16, you're probably up to a good solid 10 to 20% right now. and like I said, you can almost pick any subject and find where there's been infiltration or shenanigans or nefarious activities behind a historical event. I recently had this book, Chaos, about the Charlie Manson murders, and I had given it to my sister. She was always a true crime buff, and she pretty much hooked on the whole idea that these sort of a small minor one-off event, which was portrayed as the work of a single or a handful of maniacs, has really had some financial and some institutional backing behind them. And it was not just about going on a murder spree. It was about changing the dialectic or creating national or global tension. So ideally, hopefully, what I try and do with some of my stuff, I just is point out sort of these historical examples of this has been going on for years. It's just to take you back to House's mayor house, the mayor of Houston, the Edward Mandell House's grandfather, rather. He started the Houston Natural Gas Company, which would later be called Enron. So there's and that was almost 100 years later after he started, maybe 80 years later after he started it. And just to bring it back to George Webb again, George had mentioned he was going to visit Houston and he's going to go see Joanne Herring. Joanne Herring was she was portrayed by Julia Roberts in that the movie. I forget the movie. What's it called?
Charlie Wilson's War.
Yeah, Charlie Wilson's War. But so Herring, she was married to the president of Enron. She was married about 4 times, and after he died, that's when they changed the name from Houston Natural Gas or some derivative of that to Enron. But she goes back to all the way to House days, even though she wasn't even alive. She was very active in the Houston Minutewomen in the early 1950s, which is an anti-communist group of housewives who were mostly concerned about school curriculum. And that group in itself was started by a Belgian woman who would basically got the U.S. involved in World War I. Susanna Silvercroy. Silvercroys were Belgian, and she did the whole Greta Thunberg tour all around North America in 1917, 1918, saying that we have to stop the Huns from raping Belgium. And there's tons of Rothschild connections between the Silvercroys and the Rothschilds. But yeah, they all seem connected. I'm under the impression, I'm working from the thesis that if you can sort of work back, start from the past and work forward and see who's probably a bad apple, and also start from the present and work backwards and see who might have come from a bad apple tree and be part. You can't say all these people are guilty of shenanigans and nefarious activities, but they're still holding that wealth, and they come from one of those families, and they're probably not to be trusted.
Well, you make me think of the people that have, at least according to historical accounts, have bucked the system and paid for it. And John F. Kennedy is one. I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt is another. They both came from prominent families, very prominent families. Franklin Roosevelt, he died under, I would say, very suspicious circumstances at a time when U.S. foreign policy was hanging in the balance as between were we going to present an aggressive face against Soviet Union and do the dullest thing, or were we going to negotiate with the communists and be friendly with Russia? And the people that won, of course, are the ones that supported President Truman had him installed as the vice president, conveniently, I guess, and so that when FDR died, he became the president, and he was totally guided by that financial power, whatever you want to call it. The one that Woodrow Wilson referred to as there's a power that's so dark and powerful that even the most established businessmen are afraid to speak of it above their breath. And that power still exists. And that power was, obviously involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. But we have something that tells us that, at some point, certain people are going to break out of that thing and try to do something for humanity to try to save us from the inevitable doom when it does go over the cliff. But the other idea is that, they've got us in this psychological control too, that, we think that all this is normal, to get back to the theme of Michael Hudson's talk there, that they've not only have these banks convinced the people in the former colonial eras and also in Europe, in Britain and everywhere else, that this is normal, that the United States is the military muscle of the world, and it's normal that we're in this incredible amount of debt, and it's normal that we have to have all of these wars. And for all of the preaching and rending of hair or rending of your garment or whatever you want to call it about nuclear war and how horrible it is, it doesn't stop war. War keeps going on. War's been a constant thing. And what I'm saying, if we don't keep fighting these wars, is that when we go over the cliff? What do you think, David?
Well, just my reaction to that is with Truman's installation. One of his really close advisors was Clark Clifford, who was a lawyer who I believe became the Secretary of Defense, but he was also involved in the BCCI. He became the head of the BCCI bank. So if we're talking about Joanne Herring, we have to say that she was from Houston, and her next door neighbor was James Baker growing up when she was in Houston. And then with Baker, he also was after he left, I believe that he was Secretary of State. He became the chief counsel of the Carlyle Group, but he also was an advisor for Enron. So there is, I don't know how to stop the perpetual wars, because as he said, as Hudson said in his speech, is that that's the way that the financial system is currently set up for them to make money for the banks, is to continually have military interactions, and that the system is not designed for peace. It's designed for constant conflict and pressure to be applied to basically to all people, whether you're on the left or the right. It's the strategy of tension model. And I don't know. I mean, I hope that, I feel like one of my great self-criticisms is that I don't come up with like solutions. I mean, I'm just like trying to constantly, look at all the structure of the problems that we have. But I don't know. I mean, it's very hard because, people are trained to want their, even with like the elections last night, I went over to have dinner with my mom, and she wanted to watch the election results and all this stuff. And I hadn't watched, TV in so long, and just to like listen to the, the issues that they're talking about. I mean, obviously like inflation was like a major thing. And then, is it going to be the big red wave and, all this stuff. And I don't know. I just don't, I do think as far as like the Russia, I'm still in the camp where I look at Putin's background, and it's an intelligence background. It's Dresden Bank, which is a German bank. He's installed, a Rothschild agent. Gerhard Schroeder is a director at, their big energy companies like Gazprom and Rosneft and Nord Stream, all of the big kind of energy players in Russia. And again, like, I don't know what the end goal is on this stuff, because I do think, if you've been running these systems for so long, you already have all the best assets. I mean, you have the how to use financial pressure to bankrupt your rivals. I mean, the Rockefellers showed that in the late 19th century, how to bust your rivals using rebate systems, and or using loan or shares for loans, or privatizing industries after financial collapses. Like, I feel like they've been doing this for so long. So again, like, I don't know what I want to be hopeful and try to come up with solutions, but at the same time, it just does seem like the system has been stacked, to not be solvable. And I don't know. I hate being so negative on it, but so that's why I just spend my time trying to study all the characters in in all these different things we talk about. And like with Bill, like, I love listening to the Gibson Island stuff, because again, like, the guy that started the Gordon Research Conferences is a Wayne State, from Detroit, Neil Gordon. And he was, I didn't realize that he fell out of the hotel in Detroit the same week as what's his name, James Forrestal. And again, like, you look at the rivalry between James Forrestal and Stuart Symington, and Symington's family, is the developers of Gibson Island. And so there are these big things that link in there. The other one that I always want to talk about is Julian Huxley and his role, as far as setting up the biology labs at Rice University, and then later going on to UNESCO and starting the World Wildlife Fund, and sort of all these groups that seem to be doing the dirty work, or what do you want to say, the wet works of these operations, and they all are linked. And so as far as the solving the problems, like, I don't have like great I feel like I studied the economics, and I loved learning about the macroeconomics and microeconomics, but again, like, they don't talk about the shadow economy, or the drug economy, or these things. They're not talked about. And that was another thing that Hudson talked about, was how the United States made a big international push to start drawing in the dark economy. And I know John's talked a lot about the whole Castle Bank and Trust, the Paul Hallowells, and then the Nugan banks, and sort of these opium banks, and how they partnered with the the CIA gets a lot of the fingering, but it's really the international intelligence organizations that are working in partnerships for that stuff.
Well, we've run out of time, guys. Opened up a lot of very interesting subjects, and we're going to have to get back together and follow up on this. I want to leave you with the thought that at some point we're going to have to face the idea that there's just too much debt and it's not payable. And while a lot of folks are saying that the answer is a bankruptcy procedure for the big banks, to have to force them through a bankruptcy and then divest them of all that worthless paper that they're carrying, and that will unload the rest of us gradually. I wonder if there isn't a need for an even more drastic solution, and that would be the Jubilee. I'm thinking that a Jubilee party might be the third party winner for the next election. Are you with me?
I feel like you need to write a fiddle tune about the Jubilee.
Oh yeah, there's going to be a jubilee, and everybody's going to be free of every debt is canceled. I mean, there's no debt at all from January 1st, 2024, or whenever we take office. All right, so let's get together and organize this thing. Just cancel it all. Just write cancel on all of that paper and start over. What do you think, Bill?
But yeah, there's a hook though. What's the hook?
There's no hook. It's just it's like we all.
There's always a hook.
No. It's like it's in the Bible, man. You read it. It's got to be good. It's in the Bible. All right. Thanks, guys. David Cranmer, Underdown, Bill Taylor, and if you want to find these guys, look on Twitter. And Bill has a website, Deep State News, right?
Yes.
And David is always on Twitter, so it's easy to find him there. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being with us, and I really enjoyed it. Good night now.
All right. Good night. Good, Dave. It was good.